The CMOs that are really leading now are operators. They're growth operators. They're not campaign operators because they own, I mentioned SDRs, they own revenue impact. They own alignment with other teams. They own that customer experience. And they also own being able to use AI to drive transformation. So really that growth operator, a number of CMOs I've spoken with on the program have elevated from the CMO role to the chief go-to-market officer or the chief market officer. So it's really about orchestrating and operating at a much more global scale. I don't mean global geographically, I mean global across the organization versus running a 3-month campaign or a 6-month campaign, and then you change it in second half and that sort of thing. It's about really driving growth for the organization and not just at a tactical level, because that doesn't work anymore.
Hey everyone, this is Kevin Kerner of Tech Marketing Rewired. Hey, I just had on a fantastic guest to start the new year. Her name is Lisa Martin, and she runs the Lisa Martin Agency, and she's also the podcast host of CMO Unscripted, and formerly was even a NASA scientist. I called Lisa last year because I was curious about her moving from her marketing role, senior marketing role, to a podcast and media hosting role. And I thought, what a great way to open the year up with someone who has such a great background, but also a fellow podcaster. So on the episode, we talked about our past 12 months worth of podcasts. She talks to a lot of great CMOs, and you'll hear a lot of the different stories she has from the CMOs she's talked to. I really wanted to dig into what the gaps were that CMOs were facing last year and what she thought those gaps would be this year, and how a lot of the CMOs she was talking to are addressing these challenges. So it was a fantastic conversation. Lisa is an awesome podcast host. So I really recommend you listen to her podcast and check her out. But I'm excited to get into this one. Before we get started, I wanted to mention that Mighty and True is my company. We're an agency that helps technology CMOs fill gaps in strategy. So if you're a CMO that has a specific gap or strategy that you're trying to get to that involves revenue performance, we can help. So that's it. Let's get to it. I'm really excited about this. Happy New Year and welcome to Tech Marketing Rewired. All right, Lisa, welcome to Tech Marketing Rewired. Great to see you.
Great to see you too, Kevin. Thank you so much for having me on the program.
Yes, I was looking forward to this one. Happy New Year, by the way. This
Happy
will be my
New
first
Year.
podcast of the new year, 2026.
Same. Excellent. I'm happy to be the first.
Yeah, I'm shaking off the dust from a long break. Well, not too long, but I was really looking forward to this. This is going to be an interesting one for me because I'm both talking to a former employee at NASA and also a podcast host. So yeah. This is going to be very interesting. I wonder, I know your background. I was wondering if you could give a little bit of your background, then we'll get into it.
Yeah. So for the last 20 years, I've been in tech and marketing specifically, and then kind of got into MarTech and analyst roles. Started my own marketing agency about 12 years ago now to really focus on helping CMOs really identify things like getting their executive voices to market faster and better, and really being able to get the voices of their customers to advocate. But I started out as a scientist. You mentioned NASA. Back in the day, my degrees are in biology. And I got into NASA after getting my master's degree in molecular biology and realized that really kind of what we were doing there was storytelling. You can take really, cryptic scientific data, but what you have to do with it is really make a data story that people can understand and act on. And so I brought that into the technology field and into marketing and into eventually broadcasting and podcasting.
So cool. You're the first NASA scientist I've had on the podcast. Former NASA scientist.
Former, yes.
Yeah, very, very cool. Okay, so one of the reasons I wanted to kick off the year with you is we both talk to CMOs regularly through the podcast. So I thought maybe we could riff a little together on what we're hearing the themes were from last year and how they're carrying into this year. I'd be really interested in your perspective. So I'm going to ask you for, as we talked about kind of in the pre-call, I'm going to ask you for just your perspective on a few things. Like I'll have you set the themes and then we'll kind of riff on them. And I can give some too, because I've had on this, I think this is episode number, this will be in the 30s for me. So I've got quite a few people. So yeah, let's just get right into it. Does that sound good?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay, well, let's focus on some gaps that you're seeing from your conversations. Why don't you give me your number one, your first gap from the conversations that you've had? And maybe before you get started, a little bit about your podcast too, so we can set context for that.
Yeah. So the podcast, we launched it in the middle of 2025. It's called CMOs Unscripted. We filmed 13 episodes in season 1. Season 2 just launched, and we'll have another suite of episodes there. And really, I think one of the a number of key themes came up from the CMOs I talked to last year on the podcast, and also in my marketing agency work. And there's a lot of anxiety around AI and speed and relevance. The message is loud and clear, and you probably heard this a ton from your CMOs, that it's blunt. If you're not actively experimenting with AI, you're falling behind, because the winners are in the execution phase. Like last year, a couple of years before, was all about experimentation. And now it's got to be about execution. But then there's tension kind of underneath that urgency, because
Yeah.
we know that a lot of AI initiatives don't stick. And the jump from generative AI to agentic is moving so fast that teams are concerned with, how do we keep up and absorb it culturally, not just technically?
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think, I totally agree, that anxiety piece. In fact, we just launched a blog post this week or last week on the whole idea of speed in initiatives and launching. I do think there's this anxiety among every CMO I talk to about not moving fast enough. And one of the things I've thought is like, is that really true? Are you really falling behind? Do you think that maybe the hype is so great now, and certainly the platform providers are sort of are pushing a lot of this, but do you think that they're falling behind, or do you think it's just a feeling of, the hype versus reality?
I think it's more of a feeling, because every CMO I spoke with in 2025 is really, everyone's leaning into AI. Generative for sure, now agentic, and they're achieving some amazing results, like 2 to 3x faster content production. They're dealing with better conversions. A lot of CMOs also, I'm finding in the last year or so, are now owning the SDR function. And so they're
Yeah,
using GenAI to really help educate and enable those SDRs in a more precise, more personalized way in terms of the customers. So I don't think they're falling behind. I think one of the challenges is, from a cultural perspective, they're all really leaning into ensuring that their teams are embracing it. In fact, several of the CMOs that I talked to have had their teams initiate marketing AI councils and really leading with, we want to try to experiment with this next. So it's really about kind of like balancing the experimentation phase with the execution in what's proving value to the organization. The ROI proof point is also challenging, because there's a lot
yeah,
of productivity gains. I mentioned a few of them. But in terms of really the real value that you want to bring to the board, that's an area where CMOs are really doubling down to determine where the value is, how they prove it's related to being able to drive revenue and
yeah.
ultimately impact the business going forward.
You know what I find that was really interesting? The people I talked to this last year, a couple people from Qualified, which is sort of agentic SDR, and they're doing so much cool stuff. I talked to Personal AI, so the CEO of Personal AI, and a few other platforms, Gong. And it was really interesting that those companies that have AI pretty much embedded in their product were doing the most innovative things inside of their own products and the surrounding ecosystem.
Yes.
So if you're a CMO inside a platform that already, like HubSpot, that already has AI built into it, you may be way far ahead. But the CMOs that I talked to that were not in those platforms and using those platforms as customers weren't as far ahead. Super
And
interesting.
it makes sense. I think I've been fortunate that everyone that I've talked to, whether it's Snowflake CMO or
Yeah,
Dynatrace or Absolute Security, for example, Palo Alto Networks, they all have AI infused into the technologies and services that they deliver. So you bring up a great point, that they're
interesting.
using AI in ways that are really helping them to manage that speed with which AI is evolving and the speed with which their customers are consuming content,
Yeah,
not offline, but in ways that are disconnected from sales folks. So they're really leaning into those pragmatic small experiments, those real workflows, those keeping humans in the loop, and those
yeah.
AI councils that I talked about, to really develop a culture where the teams are embracing it, they understand, and they can explain how the AI in their products and services works to benefit
Yeah.
customers and partners.
Yeah, they almost like have a superpower because they have the platform, they got the product
Yes.
people and those things. It's kind of a disadvantage right now to not be in those companies. Although I do feel like if you're a CMO and you're not in a Snowflake and you're just in a brand that doesn't have a relevant AI product for marketing, starting with the stack that you have is really important. Like from a speed perspective, rather than feeling like you're behind and trying to buy everything, and you immediately build a data lake and you do all the things. It seems like the platforms that you do have, HubSpot, we use Apollo, we use Clay. Those all have they all have AI in them. So just using
Yes.
what you have versus looking outside is kind of a speed play. It's like slowing down and looking what you have versus speeding up.
Absolutely. And one of my favorite conversations, in fact, we have the HubSpot CMO on CMOs Unscripted in a couple of weeks, but I had a
Nice.
conversation with the CMO of NetApp, Gaby Boko, and she talked about NetApp being a data storage and infrastructure company, but really kind of unleashing genius within their technologies and leveraging not just all the data in the world, but using AI to cull through what's the most relevant data, because we all know the data lakes are everywhere, data swamps, whatever you want to call it, whatever it actually is. But there's so much noise and junk out there that organizations need to use AI like NetApp is to really glean the valuable data so that they can not only optimize their products and services, but deliver more value to customers as customers are also facing the same AI pressures. But
Yeah.
Gaby Boko, the CMO of NetApp, was very clear on we have to be very careful about AI washing. And that's something that popped up. You've probably seen this over the last
Yep.
couple of years, where I would go to conferences and you'd hear like the Michael Dells and the Jensen Wongs saying, if you're not into AI, you're too late. And so that's where that speed and that urgency and that sort of tension popped up. But organizations need to be clear that they understand how they're using AI to market, but also how AI is being infused into their technologies and what the values are for the customer ecosystem. It's not about just saying AI inside, it's about proving the value.
Yeah, 100%. And I'm curious from your conversations too. I've heard a lot about workflows, automations. And I like right before this call, I was working on a make automation and it was driving me crazy. I couldn't get it to work as well as I wanted to, which is kind of the normal gig for me.
Yeah.
It just never works quite the way you expect it to. It seems so easy. Have you found anyone, is that same frustration with AI? Does that lean into also all the hype around agents and automation and those type of things? Is anyone doing that well yet from the people you've talked to?
They're all talking about it, and they've been talking about it for the last, I'd say 6-9 months about we want agents all over our org charts. We're going to be tasking employees with doing that. Well, what are those agents doing for the employees? What are they doing for the technologies and the products? I think the only concern I heard when I was speaking with Jennifer Johnson, the CMO of CrowdStrike, about just the speed with which we went, as I mentioned earlier, from generative AI to agentic.
Yeah.
Can culturally organizations keep up with that? It's more, I think, the concerns on the cultural adaptation and evolution as tech is evolving so fast versus the technical acumen. I think that we're going to see a lot more. We're seeing a lot more going from experimentation in the last couple of years to execution and impact.
Hmm.
So I am looking forward to hearing more agentic AI stories in 2026 where they're actually able to surface value for the organization from a revenue perspective and, of course, from a customer perspective.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, and I think there'll be more evolution in the platforms out there that
Oh, yeah.
make agentic simpler. I'm talking to one of the podcasts I talked to last year. I'm about ready to launch it in the next month or so. Is the CMO of Assemble, and she went from a large job at Salesforce where she had all these people. So I think she had a staff of like 60 or 80 people to herself and a couple other people as the
Yeah.
CMO of this small business, a really cool company. But they're an agentic AI company, and so that she had the advantage of that. But she had this great idea to actually, if you're going to have an agent work on your behalf, and context engineering is really important, when you actually hire the agent and train them just like you would a new employee, like literally have an onboarding like a new
Yes.
employee. So and how much time would you spend on a new employee? You'd spend at least a couple day, at least, a few
Right.
days. And most people expect these agents to just work immediately. But that idea of an agent as employee, I picked that up in a bunch of different conversations, but that was the one where I was really like, wow, she's really got this figured out.
We've talked about that as well. When I was speaking with Mandy Dollywall, she's the CMO of Nutanix, and she talked about last year before we even did the podcast the need and the idea to have agents all across the org chart. And I talked about that, like you were just saying. Well, do you treat them as employees? How do you manage
Yeah.
them? What does the onboarding process look like? And how are they gold, if you will? Because I think you're right with the woman that you were talking to, and I think Mandy Dollywall is right as well, is they have to be treated as employees. There
Yeah.
can't be this assumption that they're going to be on minute one nailing it. There needs to be that onboarding and that kind of coaching and training process. And another thing we talked about from a training perspective is bias. Emily Foley was on, and she was the CMO at the time of Cisco Capital. And she talked about the importance of language when you're training and talking with AI so that we don't build in, obviously we already know there's a ton of bias out there anyway. How do we start identifying that and talking to the models in ways that are much more favorable, much more diverse, really create that accessibility so that the agents themselves, once they're trained, are ideally trained really efficiently, really effectively, and in ways that are really supportive across different types, groups of people and other agents.
Yeah, it's really cool. There'll probably be agent training roles in companies, or there probably are
Yes.
now actually, just to
There probably
train.
are. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. This is fascinating. I couldn't have guessed. I wouldn't have guessed that AI would have been your first. Would have been the first trend that you see. Of course,
Yes.
I'm just kidding. AI is like, it's crazy. If
It
you
is.
had to go to the second, this is, yeah, I mean, this was a really good topic, but if you had to go to the second topic that might not be AI related, what do you think the trend is that you were seeing from the CMO group?
It's an oldie but goodie, and that's integrated marketing.
Hmm.
One of the great things that I was hearing is integrated marketing really as becoming the company's operating system to do things like unify brand and demand, product marketing, comm sales around one coherent narrative that moves pipeline. We've been talking about integrated marketing for a very long time, but some of the conversations I heard about really building it as the foundation of an operating system and ensuring that marketing is speaking the language of the CRO, of the CFO, the CEO, and the board so that that alignment doesn't slow things down. It actually
Yeah.
accelerates things so that marketing then can get to the board and be able to share what they care about these days, which is not MQLs or campaigns. It's ASP, it's revenue, it's win rates and things like that. That marketing is now being able to show how they're impacting that in a positive way.
Yeah. And are they doing that with their teams, training their teams about integrated marketing?
Yes.
And or have you seen them actually trying to go farther into the company to product,
Oh,
customer
all the
service,
way to product, customer
sales especially?
success, support, sales. Yes. That's
Yeah.
what that's what Mandy Dhaliwal talked about from Nutanix. And I thought she had such a brilliant way of describing integrated marketing as doing just that, really helping CMOs really demonstrably boost productivity. I mentioned the SDR functionality, a lot of it moving to CMOs. Some CMOs don't support that because they think, hey, the sales job, they want to be in a sales track. But really the winning model from an integrated marketing perspective is marketing being that orchestrator
Yeah.
to align with all across the organization, from the bottom up, from the top down, not just within marketing per se, but to sales, to support, to customer success, to operations, to finance, et cetera. That's where they're seeing tremendous success. And they're really changing the narrative because marketing isn't giving marketing speak to finance or to
Yeah.
sales. They're talking in their language, and that just brings a lot more trust into the equation.
Yeah, I interviewed the CMO of Sedaris, Josh Leatherman. He had written a book called Scalable Acts of Marketing, which is really good. And it's a fable. The book is kind of a fable of this CMO who's really frustrated and he doesn't have great relationships with across the company. And he hires these people and puts in place a system that allows him to basically go into the rest of the organization and build relationships. And in my conversation with him, I thought it was really interesting because it was part system, but it was also part that he was courageous enough to actually go and have the conversations with these other people that some marketers just don't feel empowered to have. And so it was really interesting, more personal relationship was happening between the different departments to make go-to-market work.
I think it's not a non-negotiable these days, basically.
Yeah.
From all the conversations I've had and for how long I've been in marketing, the relationships, and we talk about like customer relationships and how important they are and partner relationships, but relationships internally are increasingly more important. So leaders have to be willing to maybe step out of the comfort
Yeah,
zone
that's right.
and learn the language and the narratives that other departments are speaking so that they can converse, so that ultimately when they get to the board and the board cares about win rate and ASP, they can all talk about that and demonstrate the collective impact that they're making. I think it's just table stakes.
Yeah, it was one of my gaps that I had on my list was I called it the translation gap, which was the gap between what you do in marketing and the boardroom metrics and being able to have a talk track that's beyond MQLs and those type. That was brought up
Has to
so
be.
many times in the
Yes.
conversations that I had. Pipeline velocity, actual pipeline, end results, sales, attribution back down to the sale was really
Yes.
important. So it's a big part of my conversations as well.
Yep. And we're having the same conversations. And the nice thing is now with the way that technology is evolving, even with AI, generative, agentic, there's so much more ability to do all the attribution that before was a little bit fuzzy. And now it's becoming clearer, which I think I had a CMO on the program who was a CMO at Trellix. He's moved on to Absolute Security. But Trellix is PE backed. And he said the differences between managing up at a PE-backed company versus a pre-startup, a pre-IPO, or a public company are very different. And so being able to leverage the technology to show and really accurately demonstrate your value from a metrics perspective. And he was very clear on no more vanity metrics. One of my favorite quotes, I think, in the whole series was from Ivana Karen's CMO of UiPath in APJ and EMEA. And she said, I asked her, I said, is the MQL dead? And she said, yes. It was a mic drop moment because it's all about vanity metrics, impressions. No one cares. It's about the moving the dial on revenue to the organization, but showing your value as a marketer to the board, to sales, to finance, to the CEO, to everybody that needs to know what you're doing and how you're actually moving the needle.
Yeah, this is fantastic. Let's do one more theme from your perspective if you have one.
Gosh, I think probably we talked about AI, we talked about integrated marketing. I think really the CMOs that are really leading now are operators. They're growth operators. They're not campaign operators because they own, I mentioned SDRs, they own revenue impact. They own alignment with other teams. They own that customer experience. And they also own being able to use AI to drive transformation. So really that growth operator, a number of CMOs I've spoken with on the program have elevated from the CMO role to the chief go-to-market officer or the chief market officer. So it's really about orchestrating and operating at a much more global scale. I don't mean global geographically, I mean global across the organization versus running a 3-month campaign or a 6-month campaign, and then you change it in second half and that sort of thing. It's about really driving growth for the organization and not just at a tactical level, because that doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, very, very good. I was going to ask you about the questions that the smartest CMOs they don't have answers for. And something crossed my mind right as you were saying that, and I read something recently, just in the last couple of days, about go-to-market executives and how there was a significant amount of angst in sort of job satisfaction in leaders that were running go-to-market. And maybe one of the things that I would say that some of the CMOs, maybe not on the podcast, but behind the scenes have talked about is just how hard it is to actually be a CMO, to actually lead an organization. And I wonder if you've gotten kind of that same sort of tone of, man, it's really difficult to do this now. They're not giving up, but it's very difficult.
I actually haven't heard that, but a number of things that I have heard in terms of where their angst is around this whole, we talked about this a number of times already in the podcast, the shared currency of the CMO and sales leaders and finance and the board, so that they will accept marketing and the impact that it's making in what are often very long, complex B2B cycles. Another angsty area that I found was the customer journey. It's very fragmented. The buyer does get enterprise 17 plus touches on their own before they even contact an organization. So they've got multiple channels, they've got multiple messages, they've got in an LLM driven world. Where do we invest? Where do we overinvest? Where do we underinvest from a search perspective, SEO plus GEO and channels? Because buyers are self-educated. So how do we really make sure that our message across channels follows them, is really clear and succinct? because that buyer has been in the lead for a while. And now with AI, they're only going to be more in the lead, or there's too much AI slop out there and they will be confused. That's really, I think, some of the angsty things that I've heard, as well as still, how do we measure the impact of AI credibly and consistently across, above and beyond productivity, but quality, pipeline velocity, and revenue? The anecdotes for how AI is boosting this or that don't land anymore.
Yeah, totally. I think there is a lot of angst around marketing inflation too, and that some channels cost you more and you get less out of them, and
Exactly.
other channels seem free, but you got to put a lot of time into them, like
Yeah.
a GEO or something. And they're very right now it's a little bit like Jello. You just don't know exactly what you're doing in certain
Right.
channels. So that
And it's,
uncertainty about where things are headed from a channel perspective and costs
yep.
is creating a lot of pressure in the system.
And the fluidity. You mentioned Jello, which, kind of you wiggle it. I think that's a great parallel, the fluidity with which things are moving or operating right now. And there's so much we don't know. But I think my favorite thing, my first podcast I did a couple years ago, was called Marketing, Art, and Science. Because from a former science perspective, but also the artistry, but those two coming together and really kind of not necessarily balancing, but really how it's more of a pendulum, how CMOs need to lean into the artistry piece, the creative piece, but also the science. Where are we being successful? Where are our customers going? What are we missing? To your earlier point, where are the gaps? And we have the technologies. Sometimes there's too many of them.
Yeah.
And you mentioned this earlier, orgs have to really, how do we really leverage what tools we have, not overbuy, but make sure that we are maximizing what we've already invested in so that we can deliver what the customer ultimately wants when they want it, and ensure that what we're doing is building and extending a trusted relationship.
Yeah, very good. Really good stuff. Before we get on to the next topic, which I want to talk a little bit about your transition from being a marketer to being in the media side. But I was curious. You've been doing we've both been doing the podcast with CMOs, two CMOs over the last, let's say, year or so. What do you think they're going to want to hear this year? Like, how's your podcast going to change? Do you have any plans for the next year? What do you think what do you think's on the table for the next year for you?
We're really leaning into the ROI of AI. And
Hmm,
really helping other
good.
CMOs understand how their peers are demonstrating such.
Yeah.
We talked about this a minute ago, you and I, the agentic movement. Where is it going to be successful? What are those puzzle pieces that CMOs are putting in place to ensure that agentic AI is delivering to the organization and to its ecosystem what it expects? I think there's a lot of this. The speed factor is always something that we talk about too, because we talked about going from when was ChatGPT 3 years ago, and how it's just
Yeah.
catalyzed this movement, whereas AI has been around for decades, but it be just accelerated, and that pedal to the metal is not going to change. So how are CMOs really dealing with the speed and the evolution of change in ways that allow them to build that trust that I talked about, not just trust externally, but trust internally as well? So I'm very curious to see how that's going to happen and what some of those levers are that
Yeah.
CMOs are pulling to use advancing technologies to deliver really personalized but not creepy messages across channels to really ensure that the omnichannel experience is working,
Yeah.
so that they can actually use technology to speed conversion and impact revenue in a more relevant, I think, more demonstrable way.
Yeah. Sounds like a great future next few months here for
Yeah.
how you're changing things or maybe revising things a bit. I would say the same thing for ours. We're looking to do more that's a peek inside how others are actually
Yes.
doing things, not necessarily theory, but the actual, like, I am doing, this is the strategy. This is exactly how I do it. It's just a great peek inside the tent of someone else, that just sparks ideas. So it's all good stuff. And I think the ones that have trended most for us are the ones that are more tactical in some way. It's like, here's the exact things that we're doing for hiring, for agentic, for training AI, those type of things. So it's really fun to hear how some of these CMOs
Yeah.
are innovating. It's
And also
incredible.
to be able to, the reason I launched the podcast last year was I wanted to be able to have this community of
Yeah.
CMOs who would open up the kimono and share, because a lot of folks don't. But we learn collectively together I think there's so much value in the network, and being able to have this platform that is opening the doors for so many more has been a big benefit that we hoped to achieve, and I think we're achieving it. But we'll
Yeah.
level it up for sure for 2026.
Yeah, so that's a good pivot, because I was really curious about your move from being a marketer to in the media. And you do the podcast. I think you're on iHeartRadio and do some other things.
Yeah,
It's really impressive that you put yourself out there like this. I'm sure there are other CMOs and marketers that listen to this that just think, golly, I wish I could do that. I wish I could
yeah,
do what she does. How do you make
yeah.
that move? How did you
Well,
do it? And how do you overcome the fear of just putting yourself out there like you have?
yeah. Yeah, that's a fear that's always there too. And it goes kind of up and down. But I didn't move into media to switch careers. I moved because storytelling has always been my differentiator. I mentioned back in my NASA days of being able to take really complex, cryptic scientific data and really, what does it mean? How do I explain this to people in a way that allows them to not only understand it, but act on it? And I think from a media perspective, that's where influence now lives. It's been really something, the way I even got myself into tech in the first place from being in science, where I had no experience in marketing or sales when I got into HP back in the 2005. But I thought, you know what I've been doing? I've been translating this complexity into clarity for a long time, because I had this, I don't know where it came from, this ability to take that esoteric data and turn it into a story. And then when I got to NASA, I was able to sharpen my skills there, because you learn very fast in an environment like NASA. Because literally, if you can't tell the story, the work doesn't travel, it doesn't
Yeah.
fly. And so I kind of carried that same muscle into marketing and business analyst roles. But then, the world started changing, and I saw trust shifting from the institutional level to the individual level. Like, buyers and leaders are following
Yeah.
voices, not necessarily logos. So I stepped into broadcasting, gosh, about 10 years ago with a show called The Cube that I was a host of for about 8 years, because I thought that's the highest leverage place where I think I can do what I'm best at. And that's showing up, helping to cut through the noise and really help pull the truth out with conviction. So that's really kind of the pathway that I took.
Yeah, that's great. What advice would you give other marketers or CMOs that want to do what you've done? Like just put themselves out there.
I'd say, well, you mentioned, the fear of putting yourself out there. It's there. And I've learned that it never really goes away. What you do is just because
No, tell
it's
me it's
just
not so, Lisa. Tell me it's not so.
I thought it's so funny. Like years ago, I thought I finally beat an imposter syndrome for good. And then every time I stick my neck out and I do something new, I went to work with Futurum Group and started doing network television as an analyst. I've done Schwab Network and Bloomberg in Arabic, where I'm translated into Arabic live. BBC News, Fox News, other things. Every time I stick my neck out, that imposter syndrome kind of creeps in again, when you just think, really? Do
Yeah,
I have the credibility? But it's one of those things that I'd say consciously work through it, because at the end of the day, you'll never know if you don't try. And I think that, just start small. It sounds so simple and trite, but it's true. Share one insight, see what happens. Host
yeah,
one conversation, see what the engagement is. Or write the post that you wish, I wish I'd seen this 6 months ago. Because
yeah,
I think what you do ultimately, and what I've experienced, is you earn confidence by doing, not by wanting to feel ready, because you may never will, but you'll get there time and again. And sure, you risk some ego
yeah.
slapping when you put yourself out there, but there's so much that you learn from it at the same time. It's a win-win at the end of the day.
Yeah, I read something just recently about posting on LinkedIn. They're like, well, if you have a bad post, no one's really going to notice it. It just goes through the stream. But if you write a good
Yeah.
one and it's just
Yeah.
provides some value, people notice it. But they really
Yeah.
don't notice the stuff that's not that good. It just doesn't. Nothing happens.
Because there's so much.
Yeah,
And it's
'cause
a learning curve. I
yeah,
have people that
exactly.
help me understand I'm really good at certain things. I can break down complex technology on TV or on the radio. The radio is really fun with iHeart because it's more consumer.
Oh, I bet.
Like this morning, we were talking about, the big fear in the consumer space across the world is AI taking jobs. And I covered a story this morning where the jobs of electricians and trades are booming because of
Yeah,
the need to construct and maintain and evolve big data centers.
yeah,
So it's fun to be able to help people understand, what does this mean? And I tell them straight, and I tell them the good stuff, the middle stuff, and the bad stuff, so that they have more of a comprehensive understanding that there are good things that are happening. There are going to be bad things. It's technology is inherently neutral, and
yeah.
having the ability to have a platform to share that is something that I really take very seriously. but I'm still learning how to communicate it with different audiences. And I think that's going to be just a part of ongoing learning.
Yeah, well, I think you're fantastic at it. I love your
Thank
podcast, and
you.
I think you're great at it. So you've done
Thank
really
you.
well. I would have never guessed the imposter syndrome. Never
Oh
guessed it.
yeah. Oh yeah. It came back in the other day and I'm like, really? And then I
Yeah. Oh, gotta
realized,
start this again. What's happening? Yeah,
it's
I
about
hear you.
managing it. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. I had Jacob Bank, who I had on the podcast a while back. He's the CEO of Relay, but before he did Relay app, he was like he ran Gmail. He was the main product
Oh
guy
my
on
gosh.
Gmail. Like I was
Okay.
like, man, that is so cool.
Yeah.
And he told me, I said, what's the one thing you wish you would have done at Gmail that you did that you would have known then that you'd take into your business now? And he said, Kevin, I wish I would have actually outreached to someone other than my team when I was at Gmail. He was doing all this cool stuff. They were completely innovating the Gmail platform. And he never wrote a single post, did a blog, did any speaking on
Wow.
it at all. And then when he started his company at Relay, he's like, golly, I had to start from scratch. I had all this intelligence and capital built up. I never told I never shared it. And so I
Yeah.
had to start from scratch. So he was like, you've got to get out there and speak. You have
100%.
things that people want to learn. They can learn from you. Get
Yes.
out there and do it. So there's
Yep.
maybe both ways. In one way, it helps other people, but in other ways, it actually would have helped him a bunch, which I
100%.
totally agree with.
Absolutely. Yes, I do too.
Completely.
Two-way
Okay, so
street.
I do one thing on this show that I'm going to
Yes, you
put you
do.
up to. This is called AI Roulette. So
Okay.
I've got your bio and a little bit about our talk track here. I put it into Perplexity, and I'm going to push send, and it's going to give me a question for you.
I
So
love
this will be
this.
the first new question of the year, probably the best
All
question. It's
right.
always the best question.
Good.
Okay, here we go. Okay, this is interesting. This is basically what we've already talked about. Would be interesting. I want to settle a debate about difficulty. You've held three roles that seem completely different. I don't know if they are based on our conversation. NASA scientist dealing with biology and physics, podcast host dealing with live conversations on media, and B2B marketer dealing with strategy and revenue. Of those three, scientist, host, or marketer, which one is actually the hardest to execute successfully day in and day out, and why?
Gosh, I would say marketer because there's so much data out there.
Yeah.
There's a common thread that I discovered, I guess, a few years ago when I was really kind of turning my marketing agency, Lisa Martin Media, now what's called, into an agency, and it's really about what is the commonality of being a scientist, of being a marketer, of being a broadcaster, a podcaster, and it's that storytelling theme. So
Yeah.
that part I understand pretty well. The marketing part is challenging because there are so many moving parts.
Yeah.
There's so much data coming at you so quickly. There's so much evolution of technology. And like I mentioned earlier, customers are self-serving in terms of education. So we have to be really good at understanding where they're going, what they're looking for. Are we telling a consistent story across channels to the right verticals in the right
Internally
regions?
to
Exactly
stakeholders. Yeah.
internally, yes, so that people can understand, well, what is our elevator pitch? So many people don't know it. It's
Yeah.
crazy. So it's really about fundamental storytelling that I think is where I excel. But that marketing piece, I'd say out of those three is probably the one that's the most fastest changing.
Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Versus NASA.
Yeah.
So that'll be
NASA
good.
can
That'll
be
be good.
slow. Trust me,
Yeah,
it
that's
can.
true. It's maybe
Back in the day, it can
bureaucratic,
be
a little bit
very
slow,
slow. Yep.
but it kind of makes me feel better as a B2B marketer. I'm like, I could be a NASA scientist, I think, but I
Absolutely, you
chose to
could.
be a market. I chose to be a B.
Yes. Yep.
That's
Good
great.
choice. Good choice.
Yeah. Well, Lisa, this has been fantastic. I have not had
Thank you
anyone
so
on
much.
that's both a marketer and a podcaster. So we both had the same thing in common. It's great talking to you,
I
just
love
hearing your
it.
perspective. I
Thank you
want
so much.
people
Great
to be
talking to
able
you as
to reach
well.
out to you, and definitely I recommend to follow you. I'll put it all in the show notes, but how should people get a hold of you and then listen to the podcast?
Yeah, so LinkedIn, Lisa Martin Media is the name of the company. On Twitter, and I still call it Twitter, and Instagram, it's at Lisa Martin Media. You can find me there. And then, of course, search CMOs Unscripted on YouTube to find all of our playlists and our content there. And you can find all of my portfolio as a marketer, an analyst, an MC, and a host on Lisa Martin Media.
All right, Lisa, thank you so much, and I hope to talk
Thanks,
to you again
Kevin.
soon.
Me
Bye.
too. Thank you. Bye.